The 18 months that followed became known throughout galactic history as the Great Mobilization. Every world in the Council contributed to the largest unified effort that any civilization had ever attempted. Entire planets converted their industries to producing weapons and ships based on human designs that seemed almost magical in their sophistication. Dr. Parker worked alongside the greatest scientific minds from dozens of species sharing technologies that humanity had perfected during their long exile in the void. The humans had learned to manipulate space and time itself, developing weapons that could affect reality on a quantum level. Their manufacturing techniques could create materials that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But what impressed the galactic community most was not just the advanced technology, but the humans themselves. They worked tirelessly around the clock, coordinating the massive effort with an efficiency that seemed impossible. They never seemed to doubt that victory was achievable even when the odds appeared overwhelming. Captain Murphy had been placed in overall command of the defensive effort, and his leadership style puzzled many of the Council species at first. He did not rule through authority or fear like most military commanders. Instead, he used something the humans called inspiration. He had a way of making every being feel like they were part of something larger and more important than themselves. The human approach to leadership was based on trust and cooperation, rather than rigid hierarchy. They shared information freely and encouraged input from every species regardless of their military traditions or technological capabilities. They treated every contribution as valuable and found ways to incorporate diverse approaches into unified strategies. Construction shipyards throughout the galaxy worked to retrofit existing vessels with human technology, while building entirely new classes of ships designed specifically for fighting an enemy that could manipulate reality itself. The combined fleet grew larger than anything previously imagined, with vessels from every member species working together under unified command. The silence arrived exactly when the humans had predicted, emerging from the void between galaxies like a wave of absolute nothingness. Long-range sensors could barely detect it because it seemed to exist partially outside normal space and time. It was larger than anyone had imagined, stretching across light years and reaching tendrils of emptiness toward the inhabited systems. The entity moved with purpose and intelligence that was terrifying to contemplate. It did not simply consume everything in its path, but seemed to be selecting targets and testing the galaxy's defenses. Advanced monitoring stations went silent one by one as the silence expanded inward toward the core systems where billions of beings waited. The first major engagement took place at the edge of the Helix Nebula, where Commander Torres led a diversionary force designed to test the entity's responses and capabilities. The human ships moved like nothing the galaxy had ever seen before, phasing in and out of normal spacetime in patterns that confused the silence's attacks. The battle revealed both the power and the limitations of their enemy. The silence could, indeed, turn the laws of physics against defending ships, making their weapons useless and their armor irrelevant. But the human technologies developed over 4 millennia of preparation could counter many of these reality-altering attacks. Ships equipped with human dimensional stabilizers could maintain their existence even when the silence tried to unmake them at the fundamental level. Weapons based on human quantum manipulation technology could affect the entity, even though it existed partially outside normal reality. The long years of preparation were finally paying off. But the diversionary battle also showed how dangerous their enemy truly was. Entire squadrons of ships simply ceased to exist when they ventured too close to the silence's core. Not destroyed in the conventional sense, but unmade so completely that no trace of them remained anywhere in normal spacetime. The main battle began when Captain Murphy led the combined galactic fleet in a direct assault on the silence's core consciousness near the galactic rim. The fleet included representatives from every council species, with their ships modified using human technology, and their crews trained in tactics developed over 40 centuries of planning. Dr. Kilthara watched from the command center as thousands of ships from hundreds of different species coordinated their attacks with precision that should have been impossible. The humans had somehow found ways to make radically different military traditions work together toward a common goal. The battle raged for 3 days across multiple star systems, as the silence proved to be even more dangerous than the humans had feared. It could create weapons from empty space itself and turn the fundamental forces of reality against anything that opposed it. Conventional tactics were useless against an enemy that could rewrite the rules of existence. But humanity's 4,000-year preparation had anticipated even this level of opposition. At the crucial moment when the silence seemed on the verge of breaking through the defensive lines, Captain Murphy activated a device that the humans had been building throughout their entire exile. The weapon did not try to destroy the silence, which would have been impossible given its nature. Instead, it used the entity's own reality-altering abilities against it. The device convinced the silence that this galaxy was already empty, already consumed by its influence. To a being that existed to unmake life, there was nothing here worth taking. The effect was immediate and stunning. The silence paused in its advance as its own senses told it that its work in this galaxy was already complete. The entity began to withdraw, satisfied that it had accomplished its purpose. The tendrils of nothingness retreated back toward the void between galaxies. Captain Murphy's final transmission echoed across the galaxy as the silence disappeared into the darkness from which it had come. His voice carried the determination and hope that had sustained humanity through 4,000 years of exile. He said this was why humans never gave up and why they kept fighting. Because sometimes the impossible was just another word for the inevitable. The victory celebration lasted for months as every world in the galaxy honored the sacrifice and preparation that had saved them all. But the humans did not celebrate as conquerors or saviors. They celebrated as beings who had finally come home after a very long journey. Dr. Kilthara found herself standing in the human section of the Victory Memorial that was built to commemorate the battle. The inscription was written in dozens of languages, capturing the essence of what humanity had taught the galaxy through their example. The memorial honored those who had chosen hope over despair, and who had faced infinite darkness and decided to light a candle. It celebrated humanity's journey from Earth to the stars, from exile to return, from myth to legend to truth. Most importantly, it proclaimed that humanity endures. In the aftermath of the battle, the galaxy was transformed in ways that went far beyond the new technologies the humans had shared. Every species had learned that cooperation could achieve things that competition never could. They had discovered that diversity of thought and approach made them stronger rather than weaker. The humans established new colonies throughout the galaxy, but they also maintained their watch in the dark spaces between stars. They had learned that vigilance was the price of peace, and that some threats required constant monitoring even after they had been defeated. Dr. Kilthara returned to her archives, but now they contained the living history of humanity's return, rather than just ancient myths and legends. Students from every species came to learn about the beings who had spent 4,000 years preparing to save a galaxy that had forgotten they existed. The old stories had been true after all. Humans never gave up, and they helped others without expecting anything in return. But the reality was even more remarkable than the legends. Humanity had proven that even the impossible could be overcome with enough determination, preparation, and cooperation. The galaxy was no longer the same place it had been before the humans returned. It was better, stronger, and more united than ever before. And in the dark spaces between stars, human ships continued their eternal watch, ensuring that if any new threats emerged, they would be met by beings who understood that some things were worth any sacrifice to protect. The secure conference chambers of the Harmony had been designed to handle the most sensitive diplomatic discussions in galactic history, but nothing had prepared them for what Captain Murphy and his team were about to reveal. The Council's highest ranking members sat around the curved table while advanced security systems ensured that no word of this conversation would leave the room. Dr. Parker activated a holographic display that showed star charts dating back thousands of years. Her hands moved as she spoke, making her words somehow more compelling and easier to follow. She explained that 4,000 years ago, human deep space monitoring stations had detected something at the very edge of the galaxy that defied all understanding. The signals suggested an intelligence so vast and hostile that humanity's greatest scientists had concluded it posed a threat to all organic life in the galaxy. They had called this presence the Silence, because wherever it passed, Entire star systems would go dark, not destroyed in the usual sense, but simply empty of all life and energy. Commander Torres took over the presentation, and his quiet confidence made the terrible information somehow easier to accept. He showed sensor readings from human ships that had tracked the Silence's movement patterns across millions of years. The entity consumed everything it encountered, but left the physical structures untouched, creating systems full of dead worlds orbiting cold stars. Captain Murphy explained the decision that had shaped human history for the past 4 millennia. Rather than warn the galaxy and cause panic that might have made the situation worse, a volunteer fleet of human ships had departed for the void between galaxies. Their mission was to follow the Silence's trail and learn everything possible about how to stop it. The Council representatives listened in growing horror as the humans described what their ancestors had discovered. The Silence was not just a destructive force, but something that existed partially outside normal space and time. It could manipulate the fundamental forces of reality itself, turning the laws of physics into weapons against any species that tried to resist it. Dr. Kilthara found her voice and asked the question that everyone was thinking. Why were the humans telling them this now after keeping the secret for so long? Captain Murphy's expression grew serious, and she could see the weight of 4,000 years of responsibility in his eyes. Dr. Parker answered with news that made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. Their deep space monitoring networks had detected the first signs 6 months ago. The Silence was returning to this galaxy, and it was bringing something new with it. Something that the humans had never encountered before during their long watch in the void. The holographic display shifted to show recent sensor data that painted a picture more terrifying than anything the Council had ever imagined. The entity approaching was not just vast, but was actively growing as it moved. It was consuming dark matter and empty space itself to fuel its expansion toward the inhabited regions of the galaxy. Commander Torres reported that their best projections suggested the Silence would reach the outer systems in approximately 18 months. The timeline was based on its current rate of expansion and the assumption that it would continue to grow as it consumed more of the empty space between galaxies. But what made this return different from the Silence's previous visits was the nature of its growth. Previous encounters had shown an entity that consumed life and moved on. This time the Silence seemed to be preparing for something much larger. It was building itself into something that could affect reality on a galactic scale. Captain Murphy stood, and there was something in his posture that reminded Dr. Kilthara of every human legend she had ever studied. He said that humanity had not spent 4,000 years simply running and hiding in the dark spaces between galaxies. They had learned and adapted and prepared for this moment. The humans had used their time in exile to develop technologies that could match the Silence's reality-altering capabilities. They had built ships that could survive in dimensions where normal matter could not exist. They had learned to manipulate space and time in ways that allowed them to fight an enemy that existed partially outside normal reality. But Captain Murphy made it clear that this was not a fight any single species could win alone, regardless of how advanced their technology had become. The Silence had grown stronger during its time away, just as humanity had. The coming battle would require every species in the galaxy working together with perfect coordination. Dr. Parker explained that the humans had spent centuries developing battle plans that required the combined resources of multiple star-spanning civilizations. They needed the Council's manufacturing capabilities to build weapons in quantities that no single species could produce. They needed the diverse scientific knowledge of dozens of different species to solve problems that human science alone could not handle. Commander Torres added that they would need every ship and every trained crew member that the galaxy could provide. The battle would be fought across multiple dimensions simultaneously, requiring tactics and strategies that no single military tradition could supply. Success would depend on combining the best ideas from every warrior culture in the galaxy. Commander Zexhai, who had remained silent throughout the briefing, finally spoke. His voice was steady, but everyone could hear the weight of responsibility as he asked what the Council could do to help. The future of every living being in the galaxy might depend on the answer to that question. Captain Murphy's smile returned, but now it carried the weight of 4,000 years of preparation and determination. He said the humans needed everything. the galaxy could provide. Every resource, every technology, every brilliant mind working toward the single goal of stopping the silence before it could unmake the very concept of life itself. In return, the humans were prepared to share everything they had learned during their long exile. Technologies that could revolutionize life in the galaxy. Medical advances that could extend the lifespan of every species. Energy sources that could power entire civilizations without depleting natural resources. But more than technology, the humans were offering something that no species in the galaxy had ever possessed before. They were offering hope based on 4,000 years of preparation and the absolute certainty that the silence could be stopped. They had spent millennia in the cold, dark spaces between galaxies preparing for this moment. Dr. Kilthara looked around the table at the representatives of dozens of different species. Each one was processing the implications of what they had just learned. The peaceful galaxy they had known was about to face a threat that could end everything. But for the first time in galactic history, they had allies who had spent longer preparing for this battle than some civilizations had existed. Captain Murphy concluded by saying that the humans had returned not as refugees or conquerors, but as guardians who had kept watch in the darkness for 40 centuries. They had come home because the galaxy needed them, and because they had finally learned enough to make victory possible rather than just hoping for survival. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the magnitude of what was coming. The silence was returning, and it was stronger than ever before. But humanity had returned as well, and they had not spent 4,000 years in exile without learning how to fight something that could unmake reality itself. The galaxy was about to face its greatest test, but for the first time it would face that test united and prepared. 3 months after the first discovery changed everything, the deep space monitoring stations detected something that should have been impossible. The massive sensor arrays that watched the edges of galactic space all registered the same impossible reading. Something enormous had appeared at the edge of the Kepler system without any warning. The object had not traveled through normal hyperspace like every known ship in the galaxy. It had simply materialized from nothing, as if it had stepped out of a different dimension entirely. The energy readings were off every scale the monitoring stations had. Whatever had arrived was larger than anything the galaxy had ever built. Captain Mordain commanded the patrol ship Vigilant, which was the closest council vessel to the mysterious arrival. His orders were simple but terrifying. Approach the unknown object and attempt to make contact while staying ready to run if things went wrong. His crew was nervous but disciplined as they changed course toward whatever was waiting for them. As the Vigilant got closer, the object became clearer on their sensors. It was definitely artificial and clearly designed by intelligent beings. The ship was easily the size of a small moon with sections that curved and flowed together like living tissue. Parts of the hull seemed to pulse with internal light that shifted through colors no one had names for. Lieutenant Yelnara was working the communication station when her equipment began receiving signals on frequencies that had not been used for thousands of years. The computer system struggled to decode the transmissions because they were using communication protocols from the ancient archives. The language was an old form of galactic standard, but with an accent that sounded familiar yet strange. Then, a voice came through the static that made Captain Mordain's blood freeze with excitement and fear. The voice was speaking clearly in words everyone could understand, but with an accent that the computer identified as matching linguistic patterns from the oldest recorded conversations in galactic history. The voice said its name was Captain Jack Murphy and that he commanded something called the Earth vessel New Horizon. He said his people had been away for a long time and hoped that someone might still remember them. He was looking for the Galactic Council and said they had a lot of catching up to do. Captain Murphy continued talking, and his voice carried a warmth that was both completely alien and somehow familiar at the same time. He said he knew thousands of years had passed since his people had left. He understood that things might have changed while they were gone. He wanted everyone to know that humans were not there to cause trouble. They just wanted to come home. Captain Mordain sent an immediate message to Council headquarters while trying to keep his voice steady. He reported that contact had been made with what appeared to be returning humans. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the largest diplomatic fleet in Council history was assembled and dispatched to the Kepler system. Dr. Kilthara found herself aboard the flagship Harmony as part of the first contact team. Her hands were shaking as she reviewed everything they knew about human behavior and customs. After spending her career studying myths and legends, she was about to meet the real thing. The creatures she had researched for so long were actually waiting just a few hours away. As the Council fleet approached the human vessel, they could see smaller ships launching from its massive bulk. The smaller craft moved with an elegance that made even the most advanced Council designs look clumsy and outdated. The human ships seemed to dance through space rather than simply flying through it. The humans had clearly spent their time away well. Their technology was so far beyond current galactic standards that it seemed almost magical. Their ships moved in ways that defied everything the Council knew about physics and engineering. They had not just survived their long journey into the dark spaces. They had grown stronger. First contact was arranged to take place aboard the Council flagship. The main conference room was prepared according to protocols that had been developed over thousands of years of peaceful contact with new species. But no one really knew what to expect from humans who had become living legends. Captain Murphy materialized in the conference room, using some kind of transport technology that the Council had never seen before. He was accompanied by two other humans, who introduced themselves as Dr. Lisa Parker and Commander Ryan Torres. The moment Dr. Kilthara saw them in person, she understood why all the old stories had failed to capture something important about humans. The humans had a presence that filled the room without being threatening. There was something about the way they carried themselves and the way their eyes constantly moved and processed information that suggested they were always ready to adapt to new situations. They seemed alert, but relaxed, confident, but not arrogant. Captain Murphy smiled when he greeted the Council representatives. The expression somehow managed to convey both friendliness and determination at the same time. His smile made everyone in the room feel welcome, while also suggesting that he was ready for whatever challenges might come next. Dr. Parker moved her hands when she spoke in a way that somehow made her words more compelling and easier to understand. She had red hair and green eyes that sparkled with intelligence and curiosity. When she looked at the different species around the table, she seemed genuinely interested in learning about each one of them. Commander Torres was tall with dark skin and carried himself like a soldier, but with none of the aggressive posturing that most warrior species displayed. He spoke with quiet confidence and seemed to be constantly calculating potential threats and responses. But his calculations seemed focused on protecting others rather than advancing his own position. Captain Murphy thanked the Council for their warm welcome, then said words that marked the beginning of a new era for the entire galaxy. He said his people had a lot to talk about and that they hoped the Council would be willing to listen. The way he said it suggested that what they had to share would change everything. Dr. Kilthara found herself staring at the humans and trying to match them with all the stories she had studied. The legends had described creatures who never gave up and who helped others without expecting anything in return. But seeing them in person, she realized the stories had missed something important. The humans did not just refuse to give up. They approached every situation as if giving up was not even a possibility they would consider. They did not just help others because it was right. They seemed to genuinely believe that everyone's well-being was connected, and that helping others was the same as helping themselves. As the formal greetings continued, Dr. Kilthara noticed that the humans seemed to be studying the Council representatives just as carefully as they were being studied, but their attention felt different from the calculating gaze of predators or the fearful watching of prey. The humans seemed to be trying to understand how they could best work together with everyone in the room. Captain Murphy finally asked if they could speak privately with the Council leadership. He said what they had to discuss was important for the future of the entire galaxy. The way he said it made everyone realize that the humans had not returned just to resume their old lives. They had come back because something was happening that required their attention. The reunion between humanity and the galactic community was not going to be the simple homecoming that anyone had expected. The humans had returned with knowledge and technology beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. But they had also returned with news that would challenge everything the Council thought they knew about the universe and their place in it. The news about the human wreck on Kepler 442b spread through the scientific community like wildfire. Dr. Kilthera found herself leading the largest archaeological expedition in Council history. Teams of researchers from dozens of different species worked day and night to study every fragment of the ancient ship. The technology they found was beyond anything the Council had ever seen. The ship's metal was made from materials that their best scientists could not identify. The design showed an understanding of physics that was centuries ahead of current galactic knowledge. Even broken and buried for thousands of years, the ship's system still held power. But what excited Dr. Kilthera most were the personal items they found scattered throughout the wreck. There were small devices that looked like they might store information. There were tools designed for hands with 5 fingers instead of the 3 or 4 that most species had. There were even pieces of clothing made from materials that felt soft and comfortable. One device caught everyone's attention. It was small and flat with a dark screen on one side. When their technicians finally managed to activate it without damaging it, the screen lit up with images. The whole research team gathered around as the first pictures of living humans appeared before their eyes. The humans looked exactly like the old stories described. They had smooth skin in different shades, from very pale to very dark. Their hair came in many colors and styles, but it was their eyes that made Dr. Kilthera catch her breath. The eyes showed intelligence and emotion in ways that made them seem almost familiar, even though no one had ever seen a living human. One image showed a human female with dark hair standing next to some kind of vehicle. She was smiling, and her whole posture showed confidence and joy. There was something about the way she stood that suggested she was ready for whatever challenge might come next. The translation computers called her expression determined joy, but that did not capture the full meaning. More discoveries followed as other archaeological teams began searching likely sites across the galaxy. The pattern became clear quickly. Humans had not just visited a few worlds. They had established a presence across multiple star systems. The evidence suggested they had been a major spacefaring species before their disappearance. The most important find came from an unexpected source. The Veltran Empire was one of the proudest warrior species in the galaxy. They had been founding members of the Council, and their military traditions went back thousands of years. They kept detailed records of every battle and every encounter with other species. Deep in their most classified archives, researchers found a document that changed everything. It was written by Supreme Admiral Tolvarin nearly 4,000 years ago. The document described an encounter during the Veltran expansion period when they were claiming new worlds for their empire. According to the Admiral's report, unknown ships had appeared in a system where Veltran colonies were struggling with a deadly plague. The ships belonged to creatures who called themselves humans. When contact was established, the humans offered to help fight the disease even though they had no connection to the Veltran people. The Admiral wrote that the humans brought medical supplies and knowledge that saved thousands of lives. They worked alongside Veltran doctors and scientists, sharing everything they knew about fighting the plague. When the crisis was over, the humans refused all payment or rewards. They said helping others was simply the right thing to do. What amazed Admiral Tolvarin most was that the humans had risked their own lives to help complete strangers. They had exposed themselves to a deadly disease to save people they had never met before. The Admiral noted that this kind of selfless behavior was unknown among any species the Veltran had encountered. The document ended with a final entry that made Dr. Kilthera's hearts race. The humans had told Admiral Tolvarin they were leaving for the dark spaces between stars. They said they had detected something dangerous moving toward the galaxy, and they were going to investigate. They promised they would return if they were ever needed. Dr. Kilthera shared this discovery with Commander Zexai immediately. The implications were staggering. The humans had not simply vanished or been destroyed by some disaster. They had left voluntarily on some kind of mission, and according to their own words, they intended to return someday. More evidence began appearing as news of the discovery spread. Other species came forward with their own ancient records mentioning humans. Always the stories were the same. Humans who helped others without asking for anything in return. Humans who faced impossible odds and somehow found solutions. Humans who never gave up, no matter how bad things became. The Zephyrian Republic shared records of humans who had helped them develop new farming techniques during a period of food shortages. The Crystal Collective had stories of humans who had mediated peace between warring factions on their homeworld. The Aquatic Federation remembered humans who had saved their entire species from extinction when their sun began to die. Each new discovery painted the same picture. Humans had been guardians and helpers across the galaxy. They had used their advanced technology and their never-give-up attitude to solve problems that other species thought were impossible. They had made the galaxy a better place simply because they believed it was the right thing to do. Dr. Kilthera began to understand why the elder races spoke of humans with such respect. These creatures had represented something that was rare in the galaxy. They had possessed both the power to help others and the wisdom to use that power well. They had been strong but gentle, advanced but humble. As more artifacts were analyzed, the picture of human technology became clearer. They had developed ways to travel between stars that were faster and more efficient than anything currently known. Their medical knowledge was centuries ahead of current galactic standards. Their weapons were powerful but designed to disable rather than destroy. But perhaps most importantly, their social structures seemed designed to bring out the best in their people. The evidence suggested that humans valued cooperation over competition. They celebrated those who helped others rather than those who accumulated wealth or power. They taught their young that everyone had value regardless of their abilities or background. Commander Zex-High called an emergency session of the Galactic Council to discuss the implications of these discoveries. For the first time in Council, history representatives from every member species attended. The evidence was too important to ignore. Humans had been real, and they had left voluntarily with a promise to return. As Dr. Kilthera prepared her presentation for the Council, she realized that everything was about to change. The galaxy had spent 3,000 years believing they had achieved the highest form of civilization possible. Now they had proof that an even greater civilization had existed before them, and might still exist somewhere in the dark spaces between stars. The question that haunted everyone was simple, but terrifying. If humans had left to investigate something dangerous in the void, what had they found out there? And if they had promised to return when needed, what would it take to bring them home? Commander Zex-High walked through the ancient archives of the Galactic Council. His 6 arms moved carefully as he touched the old crystal data cores that held the oldest stories known to anyone in the galaxy. The archives were quiet and peaceful. Most people never came here because they thought the old stories were just made-up tales. For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council had ruled over 10,000 different species across 47 star systems. There had been peace and order everywhere. Trade flowed between worlds and wars were almost unknown. The Council made sure everyone followed the same laws and shared the same goals of peace and growth. But Zex-High knew there were whispers in the dark corners of space stations and on remote worlds. Old beings from the elder races would tell stories in their native languages when they thought no one could understand them. These stories were about a species that had lived long before the Council was even formed. They called this lost species the humans. Dr. Kilthera spent her whole life studying these old myths and legends. She was the best scientist the Council had for learning about lost civilizations. Her office was filled with data crystals and ancient texts from dozens of different worlds. Every piece of evidence she found made the human stories seem more real and less like simple fairy tales. According to the old records, humans were creatures that walked on 2 legs like some other species, but they came from a blue and green world called Earth. The stories said humans had smooth skin and round eyes that could show many different emotions. But what made humans special in all the legends was one thing that no other known species had. The humans never gave up. The stories told of humans who would fight battles they could never win and somehow find ways to survive. They would live in places where other creatures would die quickly. When every smart person said there was no solution to a problem, the humans would find one anyway. The elder races spoke of humans with something that sounded like respect mixed with fear. Most council members laughed when anyone mentioned these stories. They said the tales were just old myths that primitive species made up to feel better about their own weaknesses. But Dr. Kilthera had found too many details that matched across too many different worlds. The descriptions were always the same even when the species telling the stories had never met each other. On the distant mining world of Kepler 442b, worker Vrendok was having a normal day until everything changed. His team was digging deep tunnels to find rare metals that were needed for building new ships. The work was hard and dangerous, but it paid well. Vrendok had been doing this job for many years and thought he had seen everything. The mining machines broke through into an empty space that should not have been there. When the dust cleared, Vrendok saw something that made his mandibles click with excitement. There was a crashed ship buried in the rock. The metal was unlike anything he had ever seen. It did not match any design in their computer databases. The ship was old but not falling apart like most ancient wrecks. The design was strange, with smooth curves and sections that seemed to flow together, like they had grown instead of being built. There were symbols carved into the metal that no one could read. The whole thing felt wrong and right at the same time. Inside the wreckage, Vrendok found something that made him call his supervisor immediately. There were bones from a creature that walked on 2 legs. The skeleton was small compared to most galactic species, but the bone structure looked strong and well designed. Next to the bones were objects that looked like tools and personal items. When the images reached the Council archives, Dr. Kilthara knew right away what she was looking. The skull shape matched the descriptions in the old stories perfectly. The leg bones showed this creature could run fast and for long distances. The arm bones were built for using tools and weapons with great skill. She called Commander Zexhai immediately. Her voice was shaking with excitement as she explained what the mining team had found. This was the first real proof that humans actually existed. They were not just stories told by old races to entertain their young. Humans had been real living, breathing creatures who had built ships and traveled between the stars. Zexhai ordered the mining site to be sealed off and protected. He sent the best archaeological team the Council had to study every piece of the wreck. No one was allowed to disturb anything until the scientists could document everything properly. This discovery could change how everyone thought about galactic history. Dr. Kilthara packed her equipment and prepared to travel to Kepler 442b. She had waited her whole career for a moment like this. Finally, she would be able to prove that the humans were real. She would be able to touch artifacts made by the species that had become legend across the galaxy. As her ship prepared to jump to hyperspace, she looked at the old texts one more time. One story had always stood out to her. It told of humans who had helped other species even when it put them in danger. The story said humans believed that helping others was always the right thing to do, even if they got nothing in return. The elder who told that story had ended it with words that Dr. Kilthara had memorized. The human had said they were going to the dark spaces between stars, but they would return someday when they were needed most. At the time, she thought it was just a nice ending to a myth. Now, as she traveled toward the first proof that humans had existed, she wondered if maybe the old stories were more than myths. Maybe they were history. And if the humans had really gone to the dark spaces between stars, maybe they were still out there somewhere waiting for the right time to come home. The discovery on Kepler 442b was just the beginning. Dr. Kilthara had a feeling that finding this wreck would lead to much bigger discoveries. The galaxy was about to learn that some legends were based on truth, and that the most important truths were often hidden in the oldest stories.